supervisor of mine years ago said, if you're ever given a talk, never ever kick off with your subject. Tell a different story. And actually, I thought it was really odd advice, but every time I do a talk now, I follow his advice. And today I'm going to talk about an odd thing that happened to me around mistaken identity recently. And I was at an event. It wasn't anything to do with a book. It was just a social event. And a guy came up to me and he said, "Could I have a picture with you?" Which was the oddest thing in the world. I mean, I've written a book, but I'm not an X Factor or anything. So it was a really odd thing. So I kind of sheepishly said, yeah, it'll be fine. And I thought, why is this guy asking? But anyway, I stood back, and as we were about to have the photograph taken, he said, "Are you still playing?" And I said, "Playing what?" And he said, "Are you still playing football?" And I thought, well, I've never played football in my life. So I thought, oh my God, this guy's got it wrong. And I said, "I don't play football." And he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "No, trust me, I'm positive." And he said, "Are you not Gaza?" And I said, no, I'm not Gaza. So that's my claim to fame. And ironically, a week later, I was in Belfast for a weekend, and a guy stopped me, and this is not a word of a lie, a guy stopped me, and he said, "Oh, how are you?" And when I go back home, I've been gone for about 20 years, but often I go back and I don't recognize people because I've been gone for so long. And he said, "God, I haven't seen you in a while. How have you been?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good." And he said, "When did you get out?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, we were inside together. We were in prison together. Do you not remember me?" The wrong person. So within a space of a week, I was a convict and Gaza. So anyway, so that's my mistaken identity stories. And actually, it's probably thematic because I think around mistaken identity, we all have an identity that we bring to our life and to our world. And often that identity, it's not that real because we bring a persona. You know, we're strong, we're the professional, but actually what we bring is we bring a story. And very often, even in the workplace, we bring vulnerability, and that's really, really difficult. So you're all in senior positions, and you're managing teams, and you've got people working for you, but you bring real life into work. And that could be money problems, it could be finance, it could be kids, it could be health problems. You know, you don't stop functioning as a human being when you go into work. But then we get into work, and we have all of these demands placed on top of us. What percentage of companies do you think are reporting staff feeling overwhelmed? Just a ballpoint figure. I'm just going to grab water while you're thinking. What were the figures?
80.
Okay. Any others?
60.
Okay. The Evidence Forbes did a big study about a year, I think it was about 2 years ago, and they reported that 75% of companies were reporting staff claiming they were overwhelmed, which I think is quite incredible. Now, other studies are reporting differently. There was one come out 2 weeks ago saying that 75% of people in day-to-day life were reporting feeling overwhelmed, which is just phenomenal. People are really, really struggling to cope. And I think the interesting thing about this for me, from my point of view, is that most people are struggling, but the majority aren't reaching out for help. And I think that's a travesty. And I really want you to bear that in mind today, because the people that you're managing, the people who work within the hospice movement, all of you are in difficult environments. You know, working in that environment is not easy. It's a highly stressed environment. But not only is it highly stressed, the expectations are really, really high. I've worked in palliative care, and I know what it's like in a hospice. People expect the best, and rightly so. But actually, expecting the best and delivering that all of the time is a real challenge. So I think within hospice movements, what you get a lot of the time is a lot of challenge and a lot of pressure to be the best, and sometimes that can be difficult to achieve. So what I talk about in 10 to Zen, the book, is teaching people how to manage the mind, because our minds create a lot of problems. And I'm just going to throw this out for a moment. I want you to think about, this morning. Let's start with this morning, really, and I just want you to raise your hand. I won't put anyone on the spot. Have you taken 10 minutes today to do practical things like cooking food, making breakfast? And if you have, just raise your hand for me. Okay, it's the majority of people in the room. Have you all taken at least 10 minutes today to have a shower, have a wash, freshen up? Okay?
Nearly everyone.
Good. That's very good to know. Has anyone taken 10 minutes out today to look after their mental health in any way, shape or form? Okay. Now that's interesting. That's 3 people in the entire room. Now normally when I go into huge corporate gigs, there can be 400 or 500 people in the room. If I go into to banks or people in the city, I ask that question and I rarely don't get any. Now that really, really astounds me, because our mental health and our minds create most of the problems in our life. Because what goes on in here dictates the content of your day. And often what's going on in here is quite difficult because we're all moving at speed. We're all doing too much. We're all really in the fast lane all of the time. We're thinking too quickly, we're processing too quickly, and a lot of the time we're feeling quite anxious. And I'm not saying that broadly. The research is indicating this really, really clearly. When we stop people and do random blood pressure checks, a lot of people's blood pressure is higher than it needs to be. When we do stress evaluations, we discover that a lot of people are really, really highly stressed. And that's because of how they're managing their mind. And it's interesting, we will all focus on our body, we'll focus on food, we'll focus on lifestyle, we'll do all of this stuff, but we won't take time out to look after our minds. So when I created the book, the premise behind it was, it was going to be 10 minutes a day. And the story behind that was I was looking after a lady I was working with, and she was highly, highly anxious and very depressed for a long number of years. And I was trying to teach her meditation techniques. And she was a character and very, very funny and very, very straight to the point. And I'd set her a technique to practice mindfulness for 30 minutes a day. She got back to session, and I said, "Oh, how's it all going with the mindfulness?" And she said, "Are you having a laugh?" And I said, "Is it not working?" And she said, "Where the bloody hell am I going to get 30 minutes a day to meditate? You know, I've got a husband, I've got 4 kids, I've got a full-time job. I haven't got 30 minutes to meditate every day." And that got me to thinking about time. I wanted to create a program that was time efficient. It's only 10 minutes a day. And from that, what I discovered is when I started to teach the program, most people could commit to that. Most people could commit to 10 minutes a day using the techniques to quieten their mind. I want to ask another question. Now, this is a difficult question, and again, I don't want to ask anybody to share anything personal with me, but if you've ever felt stressed, particularly in the last year, all I want you to do is just raise your hand. Okay. If you felt overwhelmed at all in the last year, particularly at work, simply raise your hand. Okay. And if you've ever felt that you're just spinning too many plates at one time in your life, raise your hand. Right, there you go. So, you know, this is the majority of the people in the room. You know, this is not an alien concept. Generally, people are feeling stressed. And if we replicated this talk and took it to another company, we'd find the same thing, that people are struggling. And what I tried to teach is, how do you quieten the mind? Because often the activity that goes on in there is chaotic. We need to teach techniques that bring it down notch by notch so that you're not dictated by the content. Because often when your stress levels are high, the problem is our minds they have a mind of their own, literally. And the problem is our brains, when they're in threat mode, are there any clinicians in the room? Okay, great. You can help me out if I get stuck with the clinical stuff. Basically, our minds, on the right-hand side of your brain, you've got a part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is your threat center. Now, if we were in danger today, if something bad happened and we were in imminent danger, our amygdala would kick off and it would get us out of the room quickly. And that would be a good thing. The problem is, for most of us, our amygdalas are activated all of the time, or a lot of the time. And the problem with that is when your amygdala is highly activated, you will feel tense, your body will feel uptight, your heart will be beating quicker, your thought processes will be working much quicker than they need to, and the way you think will be impacted. So the job and the kind of techniques in the book I teach are about how do you deactivate the amygdala? How do you switch that part of the brain off when it's not needed? Because when it's not needed, it needs to rest, and your brain needs to rest. But if your brain's in overdrive all the time, you're going to be tired. Another question, how many people in the room feel more tired than they want to a lot of the time? Right, there you go again. I mean, what do you think, when you look around the room and I ask those questions, what do you think when you see almost every colleague identify with those symptoms? Does it surprise you, or does it make sense? It makes sense, okay. And I think that's the thing around us here, we're all in this together. Now, the problem with overactive thinking and the problem with highly active minds is the type of thoughts it tends to create are really, really problematic. And by that I mean that our thought patterns often get in the way of our life. So most of us, and it doesn't matter what the reasons are, it can be background, it can be family, it can be cultural. I'm an Irish Catholic, so you know, I'm great on the guilt and shame stuff. I can do that one really, really well. So my patterns that get activated are often around guilt and shame, because if it feels good, it's wrong. That was a message I was taught. So I often have to manage. And you will all have a different story. Some of you will have that, some of you will have perfectionism, some of you will have the need to get it right all of the time, some of you might feel the need to fit in, to belong. It doesn't matter what it is, but the problem is that these create thoughts, and often the patterns are stuff like catastrophizing. So you're in a meeting at work and your MD or your manager throws a look at you and you don't quite know what the look means, but your brain could then start to kick off and misinterpret that look as, she thinks you're rubbish at your job. You're going to lose your job. Not only are you going to lose your job, how are you going to pay your mortgage? Who's going to look after the kids? What if I end up in the streets? Can you see where it goes? Often we can have catastrophic ways of thinking if we don't manage our minds. Other thinkings can be perfectionism, you know, that I'm not good enough. Other people are better at me. I should be doing more. I should be doing better. We're all laboured and crippled by often unhelpful thinking patterns. And the travesty of that is that most people don't recognise what their unhelpful thinking patterns are. They buy into it as a normal, and they just talk about, oh, this is normal for me. This is what I do. I'm just a worrier, or I'm a perfectionist. Actually, it doesn't have to be that way. Managing your mind and working with the content is really, really important. So essentially, the relevance to this in terms of the context of what I talk about today is, we're human beings. The people in your workforces are human beings. They're bringing all of this stuff into work. And the reason I go in and I do workshops with organisations is to help people understand their minds and how it works, how that made impact on how they perform in work, how it made impact on how they are as human beings in work, how it made impact on how they communicate in work. Because if we learn to manage our minds better, we function better, we create happier workplaces. I mean, we all know what it's like to be in teams where there's toxic cultures or there's conflict or people who are not getting on together. Because often what can happen is our minds can collide. You know, if we're working together and we both have our own stuff going on, but we don't understand it, of course we're going to clash and it's going to be fireworks. So it's about teaching people to understand how they can manage all of this. How am I doing?
You're doing all right,
Am
actually.
I doing okay?
You've got another 5.
I'm just waiting on being pulled back any minute. Sat down in the chair. So the last part of the book, I talk about my experience in palliative care, because I think for me that was really, really important. That I didn't want to just talk about psychology. I didn't want to just talk about my experience of what it was like. I grew up in Northern Ireland, by the way. I'm sure you can gather from the accent. And in the book I talk about what it was like to grow up in Belfast during the Troubles, because that was anxiety driven all of the time. And I didn't realise the impact on anxiety until I left Northern Ireland. So it was only when I left and I would hear a car backfire that I would jump, because I would think, oh my God, that's scary. And I hadn't realised how impacted I was with anxiety growing up in Northern Ireland. So I talk about that, but I talk also about what do we learn from people who are at their end of their life. You know, I spent probably nearly 10 years working in the palliative care arena, and you can't not sit with people who are dying every day and with their families and learn something about what makes a better life. And I think it's really, really important that that we take, you know, the lessons from people who are dying about how we value our time, how we value people in our lives. Are we living the lives that we are meant to lead? Because I think very often we're on a treadmill. You know, we're mechanically going through life, paying the bills, getting by, doing what we think we should be doing. But actually when we stop to think, God, am I really, truly doing what puts fire in my belly? Am I doing what puts me in fire? And I think often it's difficult to answer that question because we may not be. So the experience from the dying was really, really important for me. So in a nutshell, this is good gin, by the way. In a nutshell, the premise of my work is really about truly encouraging people to prioritise mental well-being, to realise that taking 10 minutes out of your day is a short period of time, but probably the most important 10 minutes off your day. Because when you learn to manage your mind, when you learn to quieten the activity, when you learn techniques to slow things down a bit, then suddenly you start to feel calmer, you start to feel more regulated, and more importantly, you start to get more focus and more perspective. And the really exciting thing about this for me is that all the research is really, really clear. A quieter mind and a deactivated amygdala increases productivity. People perform better, people function better. Even people who work in creative industries, when I go and work with actors or TV people, the evidence shows us really clearly that they produce better work when they're quieter. And yet, when you go and work with these people, they're on the go the whole time. They feel they have to be doing stuff. They feel they have to be moving all of the time. And yet the evidence is telling us the opposite. When you slow down, you will get more. You will become more creative. So, the impact is significant. There are hundreds of papers out there that can clinically evidence the benefits of quietening the mind. It's not just about that though, it's about the impact not only on your life, but I truly believe that when you start to live in a way where you're more functioning, when you're more rational, when you're quieter, when you're stiller, that not only impacts on you, but it impacts on your family. It impacts on the people around you. So it's kind of almost a knock-on effect where it becomes contagious, because people will notice a change. If you start to live this way, they will notice that you're feeling just a little bit more chilled, and they'll ask what you're doing, and then you can pass on what's been helpful for you, and it just then builds and builds. And that's kind of part of my mission and my work, is to really try and normalize mental health and get an important message out there, because I think there's a lot of psychobabble out there, and I'm not going to mince my words around that. There's a lot of stuff out there that I think can really confuse people, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to place a very common sense voice on mental health. It can be managed. There is hope, and 10 minutes off your day will make an enormous difference to how you manage your life. And I think that's the key things I wanted to talk about. Does that
sounds great? Take a seat, take the weight.